Hi, welcome to this Open Security Summit session in July 2022. And I'm here with Anish, which is going to talk us about the challenge of security web 3.0. And he has a lot of credibility in his area, and he's going to help us to understand also what web 3.0 actually is. And I was just joking with him saying, I'm old enough to remember when web 1.0 was happening with a whole lot of Mosaic days and Netscape and all that stuff. And then the web 2.0, and now we're going to the next evolution of this. So Anish, over to you.
Thank you. I mean, it shows our ages. That's one of the things that happens. Like if you are in a particular area for a very long time, you end up going through cycles and then you see everything happening in a slow and steady thing. So without much of an ado, I am going to try my attempt as challenges of securing Web3 more from an audit perspective. What is it required? How is it done? What are the challenges? As with always, I couldn't, hold on, why is this thing not, sorry, let me see. Yeah, I mean, you could never have any presentation on security without Scott Adams and Dilbert. That is like mandatory. So this is one from a very, very, very long time ago, and I still like it. This is literally the whole story about security all the time. Like you do something, you get it to a particular way that you work, but the usability for that sucks. So, and that's pretty much the story everywhere. And in Web3 is slightly the other way around. So first and foremost, when you ever talk about blockchain, there are a couple of things that everybody talks about. One is about decentralization. Again, in blockchain space, if you talk about decentralization, is as long as a piece of string, right? Like there are decentralized protocol, quote unquote, which have 7 nodes. There are decentralized protocols that have tens of thousands of nodes, right? So in general, this is a variable piece of string, right? And then there's a question of censorship resistance. So the censorship resistance comes in secondary. What I mean by that is if you're reasonably decentralized, then you get an amount of censorship resistance. And the last of the part is the pseudonymity part, which again, questionable. And then this is the part where some parts of my talk is going to come in handy, which is about zero-knowledge proofs and secure multi-party compute. Zero-knowledge proofs can actually provide privacy, and you can derive pseudonymous credentials for various things. And this is what normally all blockchains have. And now into the question. The obvious question is all about a smart contract security audit. So in general, everybody who has in security kind of knows how normally this works. You have an idea in your head, you kind of draft it into some logic, then you write it into some code. The compiler compiles it, the code runs. So each of the layers of this interface is a lossy interface, a lossy function. So imagine you have an idea of 100, then you have some loss function. When you draw it into a diagram, then you write it into code, there's more loss. And there's this gap between the language that you have in your head and the compiler has in its head, or the compiler interprets it. Then when the EVM runs it is a different thing. And when the stack that's in the live machine, that's something different. So what's the end result of this? The end result of this is like a lot of the smart contracts that are out there get audited, but they fail. And sometimes they fail massively. And I want to just show you like a quick view of, quick peek, I would say, right, of what has actually happened. This is not the most recent, but I have a couple of cases so everybody can get a feel of why am I thinking about this and why this is an important thing. Obviously, I am not missing the DAO hack. And I definitely have three or four slides about it. We will talk about it. That's the first of the DAOs that happened in blockchain space, and a massive hack happened. And now there is a rumor that the person who actually attacked it has been recognized. And there's a good side to this side. It's an ironic side, I would say. The ironic side is that even if somebody were able to attack a protocol and take some crypto out of it, it's pretty hard to anonymously take it all out. So if you think about it this way, 160 mil that was taken out of Ethereum in the DAO hack, I think only 10% was taken out in total by the attacker in that sense. So this is an interesting thing, right? So let's look at a few of these attacks. And I'm actually going to go through at least 2 of them so you kind of get an idea. I'm going to talk about Poly network, and I'm also going to talk about wormhole. So in general, what happens is like you make a bunch of assumptions, and these assumptions are the basis for making all these things work. So what I mean by that is like, imagine you create a protocol and you create a bridge between multiple layer ones. So what that typically means is, imagine you have some money in Bitcoin and you want to transfer it to Ethereum. And so they have this bridge just both ends and they somehow communicate magically. So the thing that you put in the Bitcoin side gets represented in Ethereum. Like that's kind of how it works. So typically they are notorious. And actually Vitalik, Vitalik is the guy, one of the many people involved in the Ethereum space. And at this point, I should put my hand up and say, Ethereum has a thing called Ethereum Orange Swarm, and I happen to be one of them. So right next to Vitalik's name, my name is also there, the Orange Paper as a reviewer. As guilty as charged. So, Vitalik has actually written a piece about like security of bridges. And it's kind of interesting. He looks at a couple of important things. But on the whole, the thing I'm concerned about is why is it that we are missing all these things? And what is it that we can actually do to actually figure out what is going on? And is there ways by which we could actually, somehow, transfer some of our learning from the things that we've done over last 20 years, as a lot of us are here, to the smart contract security world. So what I'm kind of alluding to is like security in a traditional sense is never just code audit, dynamic or static analysis, and just leave it there. No, you have continuous monitoring and you intervene, you have IPSs. So can we actually have a similar mechanism? And there's also the other side of it. And I will kind of go into the other side in a couple of minutes time. Let me just look at one at a time and then give you some flavor so you understand how big these are. So this is Mudit Gupta. This guy actually works on Polygon for security. He had a tweet. The tweet was saying, okay, here you go, 320 mil is gone. Okay. Well, that's interesting. So this was on Solana. So, and the bridge was between Solana and Ethereum. So here you go on the other side. So Solana was kind of reviewed by Kudowski guys. And the Kudowski actually had this blog post kind of analysis of wormhole attack. So this is how they describe it. An anonymous attacker used verification problem in wormhole, and 80,000 wrapped ETH was pulled out of the wormhole contract. So just for all of you who are not very familiar with what wrapped ETH is, imagine you have an asset, this phone to be an asset. This is a better one. So I'll show you what a wrapped asset looks like. So here you go. That's a mouse. And this is called a wrapped mouse. So this is exactly how wrapped assets work. So you have your asset inside it, and then you use the layer one, which is you're going to use, you just wrap it in there, right? So what has happened is like they had a wrapped ETH instance, and literally 80,000 of them got taken out. But the good side is like, Gem Capital, which is one of the bigger, firms that are in this space. They turned up and said, you know what, we will fill in for 300 million. And then a bunch of things happened and a lot of the things were found out. But in general, the summary is A, a very large amount of value was exposed. B, a bunch of audits were done by a lot of people on this contract and we missed something. And I want to talk about another one before I jump into this and go into a bit more detail. This is Poly Network, right? This is really interesting. They lost equivalent of 610 million USD, right? So that's quite a bit. Again, the original blog post is on Kudowski security website. You can have a look, but it's interesting, right? It's pretty interesting to look at it and understand how does this kind of a hack happen? How does a hack happen when, especially when there are bridges between two layer ones are connected? So this is my simple analysis. This is a very simplistic analysis. So you have to forgive me for this. These are the three challenges I see. First is getting it audited, right? So if you were to think about it this way, most of the well-known auditors, you probably won't be able to get a slot this year. So until December, if you have a smart contract right now, you can't get it audited, okay? Number two, cost of auditing. So again, this is an interesting problem. Why I say it's an interesting problem is typically a cost of doing something is a function of the value that's being guarded, right? So in general, like, if you look at a safe, safes have a rating and they kind of indicate, what is it that it is willing to assist, and the cost is kind of a function of that. And similarly, the audit cost should be like, what is it that are able to provide you the security for? That doesn't happen. Third is like, if you think about auditors, it's pretty hard to actually measure the skill of an auditor. What I mean by this is like, there is no easy metric that's available. So let's take this to the world of real chess players, like grandmasters. There's a scoring mechanism. You pretty much could look at the scoring mechanism and kind of get an idea of it, who a grandmaster is, and pretty much get an idea of how good they are. Then there is this question of dynamic versus static testing. When I say dynamic versus static testing, it's like I have a couple of tools that I've listed, kind of give you a flavor of it. But in summary, it's like, if you were to think about buffer overflows, going back a long while ago, a lot of us might recognize about buffer overflows. And there were a lot of solutions that are proposed and, tests like static solutions and dynamic solutions. So that level of solutioning and analysis hasn't really gone into this. Then there is another piece to this thing. So generally speaking, you could think of normal programming languages as having a construct where you have logic and logic states, right? And the thing here is there's another layer sat on top of it. It's called the economic layer. And what happens is sometimes the logic and the implementation layer is all solid, but the cryptognomic argument that they built on top of it is flawed. And this is part of the reason why I'm kind of saying, like, how hard is it to actually get a smart contract audited? Literally, it's become harder because what literally happens is like you look at the logic, but you don't understand, what is really happening. And I have an example of that, and that will give you some idea. Then insurance, right? And again, it's a case of irony. And, some of us are from the UK. I went to a university in the UK, and UK has a particular legal structure that allows to have cooperatives as insurance. So we have Nexus as an example of insurance that allows us to take an insurance like a spot contract. And the irony of that is there was a hack of one of the people from Nexus, and they took like 7 million out of them, right? And last, not the least, is the limited expertise in advanced primitives. So I'll talk a bit about zero knowledge a bit towards the end. But when I was thinking about this 2 years ago, I piled up a bunch of books that I have, just me, on the floor, just to get an idea about the kind of skills that you need to have, right? So starting the old world thing, soft exploitation, reversing, disassembly, shellcode, then cryptography, that's like elliptic curves and hyperelliptic curves. Then you need to understand a reasonable amount of game theory, then a reasonable understanding of financial engineering and corporate finance in that sense, a reasonable understanding of machine learning. So, and then how to write and deploy secure smart contracts. So all of that, this is just me with my pile of books just I had on my shelf that I just wanted to show somebody the diversity of skills one need to have to actually provide a very high level of assurance. I'm not saying, I've read all these books, and some of the books are very old and I read all of them because of it was at the time when I had a lot of time in my hand and I had, nothing much to do. But over time, my time that's available for me to spend to learn all these things have decreased. So now that I've actually given you like a flavor of what is all required, it should be quite obvious to a lot of people that's a power law distribution, right? A power law distribution essentially means you have a very skewed distribution, not a normal bell curve. So what this means is a very small fraction of the people have a lot of the skills, and the rest of them are I don't know what, right? This is a big problem. So this literally means that if you take 100 people that are there who could actually do smart contract audit, I don't know, maybe 20% of them are good. The rest of them are not so good. So this is interesting, right? And now I want to just switch gears, kind of give you like a bit of a flavor of, why is it that everybody gets concerned about all these things? I mean, what is it that's really, really different from a normal, core audit, right? So when you do core audit, you actually go through a bunch of things and you find a bunch of bugs. There's a whole bunch of tools that have been available. And, large part of, vulnerability analysis includes tools and, manual analysis. Same is true for smart contract analysis as well. The thing is like, the things that are normally not that common in the traditional world and more common here is like, I wouldn't say randomness challenge is really like a rare thing because of some of us who are from probably in security for more than 25 years, might quote SSL and things of that sort. Yes, I remember that one, 40-bit randomness thing. Yes, it does happen. This is a bigger problem in smart contracts. Access control. Again, people might say, Anish, that's nothing. Again, agree. But now a lot of things have changed, right? So randomness challenges is not so common in any of the browsers. I don't think there's any browser that actually has problems with their TLS SSL implementation. So their key sets is skewed. Access control, again, very well understood. Front running is interesting. Front running doesn't really happen in a traditional sense, other than in financial applications, right? So front running is something like this. So imagine, Dennis is there, I am there, and there's somebody else is there, and Dennis wants to buy a red Aston Martin, and I'm just making this up now. Right? Don't get upset, Dennis. So I'm saying, he's going to buy this Aston Martin for $1 million. And I found this Aston Martin red fitting his description at a price lower than this. I front run his transaction, go buy it and sell it back to him, right? This is more common in the smart contract world. And then there is this denial of service thing. The denial of service thing is kind of a weird thing. So why I say it's a weird thing is normally denial of service is very clear for everybody where it's happening. But here the problem is if a node does it, as in a node is supposed to do something, doesn't denial of service, it's almost impossible to recognize whether the denial of service happened at the user end or the node end. So it's a bit tricky. So this is kind of the difficulties that we have. That's, I wouldn't say make it incredibly hard, but it's harder, right? And the thing I would like to say is typically there's a bunch of tools. Over the few years, a bunch of tools have emerged. So, again, people who have actually been doing, security would recognize these tools pretty much straight away, visualizing tools you load the code up and you go through the whole graph and kind of see where it actually gets various things happen, how much of a traversal happens, are there parts of the code where nothing is happening. Then there's the static and dynamic analysis. Again, pretty much standard thing in normal code analysis. Test coverage tools in traditional production code, test coverage is a standard thing. Linting and formatting, again, same thing. Very normal. So a couple of the tools, I just wanted to give you a flavor of what it is. I'm not going to walk you through all the tools and bore you to death, but just give you an idea of what it means. So there are things like Slither and Mithril, and Mythex is more sophisticated of all three. It's like a Mithril becoming a far more sophisticated. You have 2 or 3 different licenses. Essentially, you write your code. This is a platform. It has an automated version and some manual. I haven't actually looked at how manual is manual, but I've actually used the servers. You upload your code, it gives you a reasonable, good description of all the bugs that you have. And it's kind of useful. It's not at the level where normally if you give it to Trailer Bytes or somebody like that, the report you get. No, it's a bit loud. So all of this is very similar to what we used to have previously. False positives, right? False positives and false negatives. False positives are very high in that sense. So we are still learning. All the machine learning algorithms are still learning and getting things right. So I wanted to switch gear and kind of give you an idea of, okay, what happens if something goes wrong? So generally speaking, when things go wrong, first thing you do is you write the code, you make sure that the code really adheres to what you had in mind. Again, I'm decoupling the economic part separately, and I will talk about economic part separately. This is like the logic. And then you assume the logic stays and the EVM actually behaves as per description. Sometimes EVM does weird things, but let's assume the normal thing, right? Now what you need to have is just an ability to actually insure against failure of smart contracts, right? So Nexus Mutual actually does this. So as I was saying, it's an unusual legal construct that exists in the UK that allows us to have this. So you can have a cooperative, and a cooperative can actually provide you with an insurance. So they have actually paid out a couple of insurance contracts on this thing. So it is an improvement. But if you look at the total value that's locked in smart contracts and the value of Nexus protocol, it is so tiny. So it's almost impossible for Nexus to actually provide any manner of sensible insurance coverage for smart contracts. That's kind of what I wanted to say. It's still the really early days. Now, a bit of a flavor of what I was thinking about. Curve, right? So Curve is a protocol. It's a DeFi protocol, and they had an economic attack. And I really want to read this so people really understand why I say this and why is this economic analysis really an important part, and why is it that somebody who actually does audit really need to understand economics as well. So this is by this guy called Peter. He's an economics researcher at 0x. He found this bug, and the thing is, like, this is the bit that's interesting. The next slide, right? And this is the bit I wanted to read so everybody, it doesn't come from me. It's from somebody who actually has done this, done an analysis, found a bug, and then describes what has happened. Designers this attack required a deep understanding of token bonding curves. Again, token bonding curves is not rocket science. It's pretty straightforward. A bonding curve existed before bonding curve is around still, and it's just that somebody needs to really understand it. It might not be realistic for smart contract auditor to discover vulnerability that makes use of a highly specialized knowledge. And this is kind of my argument. My argument is like, we have a whole bunch of assumptions that assume specialized knowledge. The Curve contract has been audited multiple times. As I write this, the Curve contract has passed yet another audit. In my view, it is really useful to have general auditing procedure could detect vulnerabilities of this kind by brute force probing rather than theory. To detect this kind of vulnerability, I will recommend token bonding curve audit incorporated in simulation of arbitrary two-step trading procedures. So this is where some of the things I've been talking about for a very long while. So full disclosure, I've been involved in this thing called token engineering, and I've given some of the first talks on this topic in London and in other parts of the world. I've been involved in building a bunch of protocols. So for me, this is something very important. And I've always said, and I'm kind of on the cynical end of token engineering side, there are a lot of people who really don't understand. I don't want to name names, but in general, there are a lot of people who can't even understand what points on a curve would mean, right? So they are the people who actually do token engineering. To me, that's an absolute absurdity. It's like somebody doing, surgery without understanding anatomy. If you were to say to me, what is a bone? Literally, if somebody were to ask me what is patella and I'm going to do a knee surgery, that will be an interesting one. That's the kind of people that actually are around this ecosystem. So this is literally what is happening. There is very little understanding. And secondly, the tooling is still a bit primitive. There are a couple of tools around. CAD is an example. I am not at all a fan of CAD. Again, this is my philosophy of around testing and how things should be done. Trent, who happens to be a friend of mine, he wrote something called Token Spice. Again, interesting. And there are other people who actually build other tools as well. But in general, this is the thing I was talking about. You can look at the code, but you could completely miss something that's an economic layer, and that can actually cause you trouble. Yeah, I kind of put this in the wrong place. This is what it means. Essentially, you have a front end and a back end. The front end is where you actually interact with the users, and the back end is where you have all the data on the chain. And there is no talk. I should skip this one. There is no talk that's going to be complete without actually talking about the DAO hack. Again, when I talk about DAO hack, it was, first it was like a 53, and then there's a lot more lost, and I think at the end it was like 160 million. And as I was saying, there's now accusation that somebody that is known to the community is the person behind this, and they claim that, the person wasn't able to extract more than 10% of the value that was there. I mean, in general, DAO hack kind of explained like the kind of attacks that can happen, while, the kind of attacks that can happen, or the kind of errors that can happen when you write contracts, and how it could actually result in, whatever does happen, literally, emptying of a wallet. In general, the summary is like a typical attack is like, unless gas is completely exhausted. So in general, this is like running a car. Like in Ethereum, if you want to run something in your wallet, you need to have some gas. So if you are out of gas, it stops. And typically a call stack is there. If you fill it up, then it has to stop, right? It's just standard stuff. And then if the balance goes to zero, it stops, right? That's all the normal stuff. So there's another attack being actually proposed, and the same thing happens. So in summary, what I want to highlight is like the attack that actually happened on the DAO was a simple one, a reentrance attack. But the thing is, like, it was only understood. And just to give you the idea, a lot of people in the community globally had suggested the people behind the DAO to be careful, because that's not the first time that attack like this had happened before. But they weren't very keen to, stop and analyze. It's kind of one thing that you notice in the community, that a lot of them actually want to deploy code and learn from what has happened rather than write the code, do an audit, understand it, run some simulations, maybe understand it fully well before you deploy. I mean, if you're really cynical, if you were to compare the code that, I shouldn't say that in that sense, but general code in fintech versus code in a smart contract, it is likely that the small code is, regulated fintech, right? Regulated fintech will be much more rigorously audited versus in smart contracts. So now this is the fun part. I am going to talk about some abstract constructs that I think is kind of useful for people who actually do a security audit, a smart contract audit to understand. I really believe there is some value in understanding what cryptographic engineering is. It helps in two ways. First, just like knowing how it's done and kind of understanding how things are done in a proper manner. When I say when things are done in a proper manner, let's look at a normal cryptographic library. When you have a normal cryptographic library, when you write the library, in addition to that, you create test vectors. And whenever you write the test, you run this test with the test vectors to see if the actually works. I would be rather surprised if you actually saw some smart contracts with a bunch of crypto primitives with some test vectors. So you could actually test it in a cryptographic primitive with respect to the smart contract. That's one challenge. Then again, this is a broader construct of security engineering. So I would kind of say the security engineering would be broader and cryptographic engineering is like a subset of it within it, right? So the security engineering construct is kind of what is kind of not really well understood and well communicated between the set of people that actually write the smart contracts and the set of people who audit it, right? So the set of people who actually write the smart contract have a bunch of security assumptions in their head. And they generally don't write this up in a piece of paper and send it to the people who audit it. So generally speaking, they just put it on a GitHub, get on a call, answer a bunch of things, and then the people on the audit side just go and do it, right? And then there's this very interesting construct, right? And this again is interesting in a very different sense. The reason I think provable security is quite useful in this sense. I know there is a bunch of debates that's ongoing. Different people have different views about provable security. And I think I take a cautiously optimistic approach where I see there is some value in actually having provable security mechanisms. So what that means is, like, if you could actually build a model, and if you could actually prove that you could actually have results which are in the right direction without actually having to run the whole thing, right? Then you are in a good place. But this assumes a few things. This assumes that you have an adversary and an adversarial model. So, this is, again, an interesting construct. Why is it that I can say this is an interesting construct, and why is it that has to do with anything to do with smart contract audit? Very important. So in general, when we normally do a security analysis or code analysis, we have some notions of, classes of actors. And the thing that's different here is, like, the classes of actors vary very fast. It must very much be dependent on the value that the protocol is different. Okay, let me try to explain this differently. Imagine that's a super successful protocol, right? A super successful protocol, what happens is, like, it starts at the day one as a 1 million. And like in day two, it's like 100 mil. Now, everything they designed for, if it's based on 1 mil, the security margin they have is completely and utterly below the margin, right? You have been overwhelmed. And this is a challenge. If you do a security audit and your security audit assumption is like the resource that's available for you to attack this contract is a mil, and you suddenly end up defending 100 mil or a bill, you know what has happened here, right? So this is a challenge. And it's pretty much impossible for one to do that because security doesn't come for free. Every time you increase security, there's a cost for providing security. So the transactional cost goes up, and the speed at which transaction happen decreases as well. So, standard models and kind of things of that sort. Now, I'm going to switch gears a bit and kind of talk about elliptic curves. Yes, this is one of the topics that's always been interested in. I am very, very, interested in elliptic curves because it forms the basis of lots of things. A lot of the things that happen in the smart contract space is very much tied into this. Why am I talking about this? The reason I'm talking about this is like people make a lot of assumptions on curves, right? And this is more tied into things like ZK snarks as well. So like you choose a curve, you look at some properties of the curve, you make an assumption, and then suddenly you realize, this curve is not as secure as I want. Again, the question is, why is it relevant? Imagine you're an auditor, you're told that this is the curve, this other set of curves, the curves are this thing, and this is how it's being used. Does it really mean it's secure? Well, the answer is, I don't know. So there's this paper that has been co-authored by at least a couple of people I know, right? It's kind of interesting. It kind of gives you an idea that even when people say, it's secure, you need to understand, real properties of the replicas to understand exactly what security is. And if you're getting a primitive, the real security of a protocol is very much dependent on exactly how you build it. Now I'm going to change gears and talk about zero knowledge. And yes, probably the reason I put this picture, and somewhere in the back, you probably might recognize my head. It's like these other bunch of people that were involved in zero knowledge, and there was this conference called ZK Proof in 2019. Pretty much in this room is a set of all people that you probably recognize. All the zero knowledge protocols have been created by, right? I think I can't see Shafi here. If I find Shafi, so Shafi Golbazar was in this room at that one point in time. I don't think. Oh, yeah, she's still there. So Shafi is there. Mihali did make a guest appearance. R of GWR wasn't there. All the rest of the people are there. So this is pretty much the set of all people that you could probably assume have some idea of what they're talking about in zero knowledge. Okay. So let me give a notion of zero knowledge and kind of explain why this is, and then I wouldn't bore you to death, but just enough to be bored. So in general, the idea is like, imagine, I come into this room and say, that's the door that I have, and that's the door by which you can get out. I prove to you that I have the ability to escape from this room without using the door. I am the prover, you are the verifier. You get me into this room, close the door behind me, and you stand outside. 5 minutes later, you see me outside, you know that I didn't use the door, but I managed to get outside. This is called zero knowledge. Before and after running the protocol, the knowledge you gain is zero. So think of it in the construct of using a password, right? If you run a password before and after running a password protocol, you actually know the password because the password has been sent to the channel response mechanism, right? There are some interesting constructs. So it's completeness, soundness, and zero knowledgeness. I already talked to you about zero knowledgeness. And there's a very interesting construct that I really love. The things that actually, if it were in real life, it would be so useful. So completeness is prover is telling the truth. They will eventually convince the verifier. Okay. So imagine you have an argument with somebody, right? If you assume that the argument is in zero knowledge, as long as you're telling the truth, the other party will have to be convinced. There is no way they can actually not be convinced. And the other thing is the reverse of that is soundness. It's like the prover can only convince the verifier if they're actually telling the truth. Okay. There is no other way but to tell the truth, to prove, convince the verifier that's telling the truth, right? This is like super interesting. Imagine how powerful this would be if you could actually apply this in real world, right? And this is what is actually being used in the smart contracts. Now, what's the problem, right? The problem is like it implies that you need to have a reasonable amount of specialized expertise in the topic before you could look at a smart contract with zero knowledge primitives to understand if A, it's being implemented properly, B, if the constraints are right, C, if the curves are right, and all the rest of the crap, right? So this is like a very hard problem. So it goes further if you happen to be somebody who has a smart contract with a smart, zero knowledge thing, you will have a much smaller set of people globally available to actually do the audit for you. So, going backwards. So it's like set of all people who could do the smart contract audit. Support set, then the subset of them will be a set of all people who are very good. And then a subset of that will be the set of all people who actually understand zero knowledge. So you can actually imagine. So if you want to audit a smart contract with some zero knowledge stuff, the chances that you can get done and all the pricing and all those things becomes much more harder, right? So yeah, I always mention this to everybody, and this is one of my favorite books as well. So Audit's book, actually the early version of this was in a PDF, and you can sometimes find it on the internet. I'm not suggesting that you don't buy this. That's my copy of my book. I've had it for a very long while. It's pretty interesting, right? And zero knowledge actually entered the crypto space with Zcash, right? So Zcash literally, what was actually being done was you actually have a UTXO and you prove in zero knowledge that this particular UTXO set was never ever seen on the chain. So that's kind of how it is done. And again, if you look back and look at what has actually happened to Zcash, it tells you something. So Zcash's first setup actually had a bug. So it would have allowed somebody to actually do, create a lot of these things, Zcash things, Zcash. If somebody would have found it. So they actually did a second iteration. They released sampling and they did the setup a second time. So what I'm saying is the people that are there in Zcash are very smart people. There's Ada Gabison, I don't know who else was there. There's like a whole bunch of people who are really smart, who know what they're doing. Even with that, they had a bug, right? Can you imagine people who don't understand, try to do this and how hard it is? So, now I'm going to switch a bit of gear and kind of talk about a bit more, complicated things, which always happens when you go to the edges, right? So imagine, the two meets. So you're doing zero knowledge and you're actually having this situation where you're using some esoteric curves. So I happen to know two of the three authors of this thing. So Alfred is an acquaintance and Palash is a good friend of mine. So, kind of is giving you the notion of what happens if you do security audit and then you make some assumptions or something. The assumptions that you're actually making will be the key of the basis of security of the whole thing. And if you don't understand it, then the chances that you could really do a very good audit, again, becomes smaller and smaller. And this was kind of my, follow-up slide, kind of saying, when the paper was published, they updated the curve. Again, you need to understand. These are all, Daira is very, very smart lady. She knows what she's doing. And everybody is very smart. But even then, they had challenges, right? So, on the long run, we have this massive challenge of having enough of people with enough skills, being able to price it, being able to insure it, having enough of people who understand all the cryptographic primitives well enough to be able to do audits. And then people who actually have the expertise of the zero knowledge and advanced crypto primitives and understand economics. So they could actually understand the secondary implications, economic implications of a contract. So they could actually, really, really audit a contract that actually has both cryptographic primitives and a whole bunch of economic variables underpinning, right? So, think of it as a product of probabilities, it's a diminishing result. So mathematically, it's pretty much an impossibility. So I spent a bit of time, I would say 2 years ago now, almost 2 years ago, kind of thinking about it. But I didn't come up with the solution, but I was just thinking about it. The thing I was thinking was, number one, you could actually do price discovery by using various mechanisms. And, audit and creation of smart contracts is actually a double-sided market. And thirdly, you could actually, when DeFi was working, okay, now that DeFi is all gone south, I wouldn't want to say this, but when DeFi was all working, it was almost possible for us to actually provide subsidiary constructs to provide security. And also it was possible for people to actually do staking. Staking essentially, if you want to audit something, the creator of the protocol, creator of the smart contract would actually say what the value is. And somebody else who wants to say, I'm going to audit it, will actually put some money down as a stake. So there's a risk being mitigated in multiple levels. So this is what I was trying to do. But I'm hopeful that in the long run, the community as a whole will understand more mechanisms we put in place. B, a lot of the learnings from the older world would actually get transferred over to the new world. 3, a lot more people who understand zero knowledge. There's a lot of money in zero knowledge, so I'm expecting a lot of people to understand it. So there'll be more people who understand this. And 4 is like a lot more people understand the economic underpinnings of smart contracts, and there will be the critical mass that's out there. So we can then have enough of people to be able to go through the largest set of smart contracts that's actually being created by everybody. So that's it. That's my 40 plus minutes of rambling, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
We've had to change the way we do the chat a little bit. So if you do have any questions, if you send them through to myself, which is Katie OSS, and I can ask those for you or post them in the chat. Unfortunately, that does mean sometimes it takes a little bit longer.
That's okay. I should give everybody a fair chance to, ask the questions, because I've covered a lot of things in a very short period of time with varying amounts of depth. So I know a lot of the people on this audience are very savvy in cryptography, so they would understand it. Some I suspect are new to cryptography and blockchain, so they might find it difficult. So apologies if I have given you a difficult time. I will be very open to questions. You can reach out to me whichever way you can, and I'll try my level best to answer.
Yeah, cool. Sorry, I was trying to mute myself. So the a couple of questions for you, but so basically saying that you cover a lot of stuff, especially on the history, which is really cool. So basically saying that the sort of the Web 3.0 companies or world is that world that contains that sort of verification, that layer of basically it's not that it has to have blockchain, it has to have equivalent sort of connections that allows us to verify the authenticity and everything connected to it.
Yeah, I would say it's a multiple problem. It's a whole bunch of things that are diminishing property. So what I mean by that is a problem. Oh, sorry, I get a feedback. So what I mean is, like, imagine you multiply a probability of 1 with the probability of 1, you get a 1, right? If you have a probability of half, you multiply the probability of half, you get a quarter, right? So imagine you have a smaller probabilities, a quarter into a quarter into a quarter into a quarter. So you become smaller and smaller and smaller. So effectively, when you do a normal code audit in that sense, typically the expertise that's required is, like, let's imagine the domain to be 1, right? Like, in a probability that you randomly pick a person, say a probability of 10%, right? So imagine we have to do a smart contract audit for a smart contract that has A, zero knowledge, and B, some economic primitives inbuilt into it, right? So what that means is the person who's actually going to do the smart contract audit will have a probability of A, understanding zero knowledge. Let's say 5% of the people who do smart contract understand this, right? So that's a 5 points, so 0.05, right? And now, look at the total number of people who do smart contract audit who understand economic underpinnings. So that might be 1%. So that's 0.05 into 0.01, right? You understand where I'm going? So now the pricing function becomes, there's this amount of money that's there, that's actually need to go to this. And then it becomes very expensive. So a lot of the protocols won't be able to even go near an audit because it's so expensive for them. And it's going to be very hard to find the right kind of people to do audit. The number of people that might exist in the world who actually have this very esoteric skill set might be much, much lower. So we need to actually build a whole bunch of scaffolding that can automate a lot of those things, and we can actually get the human expertise requirement a bit lower. I mean, all the things that happened in the security audit a long while ago, when we used to look at hex and debug it in our heads with DOS, right? Command.com. So type debug and look at things. That is the state of affairs now, right? So of the people who have worked on DOS 5 and DOS 6, if you recognize what I'm talking about, this is exactly where smart contracts are right now. It's a long way away.
So we need either pro for it.
Yeah.
And only debug for the ones.
Wow. Yeah. Only debug was awesome. There was the other one that I forgot the name of it. Newer guys one. Soft Eyes. Soft Eyes was bloody awesome. It actually stopped the clock. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, we are somewhere there, but you understand what I'm saying, right?
Yeah. But that needs to be solved, right? Or else this thing won't scale.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it will be solved. But the thing here is, like, incentive alignment is not 100%, right? Mm-hmm. So, I'm not going to be blaming anybody, because, like, I have a protocol, I build protocols. I've always been involved in building protocols. I come from a security world. So I'm a bit biased towards security and cryptography. I mean, I spent a lot of time doing security and cryptography. So for me, it comes natural to me. So I talk about it that way. Not everybody in this space is actually coming from such a background, right? So for them, this is alien, right? So they look at it and go, what happens if, right? So what happens if it's a slide I showed, right? 300 mil, 600 mil goes down the loop, right? And you go, oh, how did that happen? Well, if there's this is normally what I say to people, right? If there is something that is $1 million worth it, there'll be 10 people attacking it. If there's something that's 100 million, number increases. So if you have a 600 million stuff out there, if there is a bug, you will motivate somebody to attack it, right? There you go.
Exactly. Cool. So this is very good, man. So yeah, I don't think there's a couple of others have posted questions. So look, so thanks for this, and let's do panels, man, on the next one.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think it's interesting to bring multiple experiences, multiple people. And
absolutely.
Trying to do it. So
yeah, I am very happy to defend myself with my thesis.
Brilliant. All right.
All right. Okay. Thanks very much.